I want to ask you about this race in Michigan, what you make of it. Charlie?
Well, first of all, the fact that any Democrats would spend money on a Trump-backed election denier is, in fact, hypocritical. It's also dangerous. If, in fact, this is an existential threat to democracy, they should not be taking the chance that he would win in a year like this. This is going to be a real test. The three congressional races pitting the Trump-backed candidates against the among the Republicans who voted for impeachment are, as you said in your introduction, a real indication of where this party is. Because in places like Michigan and places like Arizona, it's not just whether or not voters will back somebody endorsed by Donald Trump. It's whether voters will back candidates who have bought into Trump's big lie, the most extreme versions of his election denial. And that could have long-term consequences for politics in two crucial swing states.
I want to bring in Yamiche Alcindor, who is out in Missouri for us. Yamiche, talk to us about Donald Trump's endorsement of Eric, no last name. What is he trying to do here?
Well, Alicia, this is just a confusing, baffling race here. It's the Missouri Senate Republican primary. You have a crowded field of candidates who are running to try to replace Roy Blunt, who is retiring from the Senate as a Republican. Former President Trump had said that he was going to endorse sometime yesterday one of the candidates in that race. There were two Erics and a Vicky. He put out this statement that said, I'm going to endorse Eric, all caps, but no last name. That has led to even more confusion in this race. So you have Eric Schmitt, who is the Missouri Attorney General. He is someone who is seen as somewhat of a moderate, even though he was trying to sue to stop mask mandates to go into effect in the height of COVID. He has tacked right to try to get the support of former President Trump. You then have Eric Greitens. He is the former embattled governor in this state. He resigned in disgrace just 18 months after being inaugurated. He is facing claims of sexual abuse, of domestic abuse. Both of those Erics have put out statements saying that they were the ones who was endorsed by former President Trump. They're on Twitter saying it. They've said it in person. So it's really, really confusing here. We're told that former President Trump is doing this intentionally. He wanted to make this vague so that whichever Eric wins is the Eric that he believes he would be supporting. It's also important to note that both Erics here, in some ways, have been echoing the language of former President Trump, talking about culture war issues like election integrity and critical race theory and immigration. So there really is this sense that both of the Erics are trying to be as much of a Trump-like figure in this state. We should note that former President Trump is wildly popular in this state. This is a state where where voters are really, really liking former President Trump. But I did talk to some voters who say that they're a little alarmed by the amount of influence and power that former President Trump is having in this race in their state. They say that candidates should be more focused on middle-class voters, more focused on economic issues, and not focused on trying to chase the endorsement of President Trump. One other thing, Alicia, that I have to mention, there is a third Eric in this race. You can't make it up. He is not a leading candidate, but I have to mention him because it's notable that his name is also Eric. Alicia?
It is, you couldn't write it better. I mean, Jake, I wonder what you hear from Republicans in D.C. about how they feel about Trump's endorsement power. Is it something they worry about? Is it something they wish were over? What are they saying about all these races?
In a Republican primary, it's helpful, obviously. I mean, it's not helpful when you endorse somebody without a last name, which is just basically buffoonery. but to be honest with you, Republicans here on Capitol Hill are really worried if Eric Greitens were to win this primary. They believe he is somebody who could lose the seat for Republicans. I'm a bit baffled, to be honest, why Republican leadership didn't put more money into this race to sink Eric Greitens. That is surprising to me. I got signals that they would. Senate Republican leadership and their super PAC have at times taken a hard line against candidates who they don't think can win elections. Mitch McConnell's goal is to win elections and to be the majority leader. And if Greitens wins, his close allies and his inner circle believe that they will not win this election. Maybe that's a sign that they don't believe that Mr. Greitens can win. But again, in a Republican primary, and furthermore, in a good Republican year, what's expected to be a good Republican year, the former president's endorsement is modestly helpful. There are plenty of states, though, Alicia, that are just he should stay away from. Now, he's not had the discipline to stay out of some of these races where he would not be helpful in a general election. There are states across the country where his endorsement is not helpful. States that he lost, a state like Georgia, for example, he has proven to be an unhelpful surrogate. So, but again, in the Republican base in a state like Missouri, as Yamiche said, Donald Trump is incredibly popular and his endorsement does matter, but not when you endorse, when you play a game like this, which is just really bizarre and too cute by half.
Well, and here's the thing, Jake. There's the Trump hangover of Trump himself, and then there is the Trumpism that has just seeped into our politics. So I want to go back to Michigan, where you really have the ghosts of 2020 haunting this primary race. Here is what Peter Meijer said about his primary challenger potentially disputing the results. Take a listen.
Even my primary challenger has talked about, the need to have a very large margin because of supposed cheating. And I think that is a very dangerous thing to do, to try to cast doubt and undermine. Now, if there are issues, every candidate has the right to challenge those. And I think it's important that those legal challenges be heard. At the same time, to cast doubt unnecessarily just as a way of covering in case you lose, I think undermines something very fundamental in this country. And it's important that candidates, again, tell the truth and be honest with their constituents.
Jake, there are Trump's endorsements, and then there is the instability that he has injected into the process. And that is a genie you can't put back in the bottle.
Correct. That is a dangerous thing to have candidates across the country suggest that the electoral process is somehow rigged against them. It is dangerous, and it's also stupid. It's stupid because if you tell people that a process is rigged, they're not going to come out and vote for you. So why would people so if you're a Republican candidate who wants to bring people out to the ballot box, who wants to get people energized to vote for them, saying that this process doesn't matter and it's broken is literally the worst way you could get people to the ballot box. I don't understand it. It makes no sense. It's just like when Donald Trump said, mail-in balloting, don't do mail-in balloting, go out to the ballot box. People then didn't go out to the ballot box, and Republicans like Kevin McCarthy were saying, no, we want people to mail in their ballots. It's safe, it's smart, and it's easy. So telling people to take place in a process that they are terming broken is, I couldn't think of a more idiotic strategy than that. And that's what we're seeing across the country, and Republicans might find out that it's not helpful for them, and they should tell people this process is actually worthwhile in participating in, and we believe it's fair. That's why we need you to go out and vote.
Yamiche, you are doing one of my absolute favorite things to do as a journalist, and that is to be on the road in the middle of a big election talking to voters. And I wonder, as you travel the country and you are speaking with people, how much does the 2020 election come up compared to something like the price of chicken? How high is it on voters' minds?
It's a great question. I think that voters are thinking both of the inflation and the economy and sort of just trying to survive and thrive in America. But there are a number of people, especially Republican voters, who are focused on 2020 and election integrity. I heard from a number of voters who told me point blank they believe former President Trump won the 2020 election. They believe that it was fraudulent. I try to talk to them and say, well, what about all the Republicans who are coming on during the January 6th hearings who are saying that's not true, that actually the election was decided fairly? You think of Attorney General Bill Barr and so many others who have said that, Republicans who have said that former President Trump was just wrong. But these voters that I talked to, the ones who believe in former President Trump's election lies, they believe in them. They are top of mind for them. They're thinking about them as they're voting. I will also say that some other issues are coming up. That, of course, is abortion. I talked to a young woman, a young Republican woman, 19 years old, who's pro-choice, who says she's worried that her party has just gone too far and that women's rights to their health care and their privacy needs to be a factor in how they're moving forward now that they've had this big win in the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. The other issue that's coming up, and it's one that's definitely Republican candidates, including the two Erics, who claim that they both have won this endorsement. They both also claim that they talked to former President Trump. When you listen to their speeches, you hear almost the echoes of 2020 and even I will say 2016 when you think about what they're talking about. Yesterday, I listened in and they were talking about open borders. They were talking about critical race theory and education. They were talking about taking back this country and the country being in a bad state. And really, a lot of it was culture wars. So voters here have a lot on their minds. But I think the top two issues continue to be the economy, just the way that people are living. And I will also say election integrity and really election lies.